Hi, everyone, and welcome back to AI Meets API, the podcast where we decode the intersection of artificial intelligence and enterprise integration. I'm Amy, your producer, and today's episode is going to be a treat. We're diving into open source innovation, the evolving role of AI in platform strategies, and how enterprises can scale responsibly. To explore this, we're thrilled to welcome our guest, David X, Public Sector Field CTO at MuleSoft. With decades of experience across open source, cloud, and enterprise solutions, David is one of the most respected voices in the tech space. Hosting today's episode is Ajay Konda. Ajay, take it away.
Thanks, Amy. David, it's an honor to have you here. Let's kick off the things with your journey, right? So you have been prominent figure in the open source and enterprise innovation for years. How did you get there?
Oh, it's been a journey. And thanks for having me, Ajay and team. I'm really honored to be here. I'm excited to be here. But yeah, I started off early in my career as working for a government contractor and then doing virtual reality and things like that in the 1990s. And then that's when virtual reality was big back then. And then it's like, oh, well, whenever I grow up, I want to work for Silicon Graphics. That would be the dream job. And I had the opportunity to do it. That caused me to move to Ohio, and I took care of Lockheed Martin and NASA Glenn. So we were doing visual simulation, we were doing flight simulators, really, really cool stuff there, and it was really, really exciting. And I was getting into, with SGI, they did a lot with open source, like XFS, the file system. They open sourced that, and I got to know the engineers personally with that, and after a while, it's like I wanted to move from a hardware company to a software company. So I went to Red Hat. I was there for 15 years, and I started as a pre-sales engineer, and back in 2007, covering a small number of accounts. And over time, as the company grew, I developed my career, and my span of influence and control grew to the point where I became the chief technologist there for public sector at Red Hat. And so that was really exciting, seeing everything across. And so after 15 years, I headed over to MuleSoft, and it'll be 3 years in September. And so I'm excited to be here and taking a lot of the things that I learned on my journey from Red Hat and applying them at MuleSoft. So I'm really happy to be here.
Okay, that's a quite interesting journey. Then let's talk about the open source and AI and integration. How do you see the open source is shaping with respect to AI and enterprise integration?
Yeah, and so I think with open source, it's a lot of I'm seeing a lot of flashbacks of how what is the same way that we were comparing what's the best model that's out there today. I remember decades ago, people were comparing what's the best Linux distribution, and one's leapfrogging the other, and one's better than the other, or is it Windows versus Unix versus Linux? And so over time, it looked like, well, really what was happening is that things were getting commoditized, and so it actually that things kind of got boring in a good way, because you want boring in an enterprise organization. You don't want surprises in an enterprise organization. And over time, Linux matured, and the open source operating system was able to compete head to head with things like AIX and Solaris, and from a feature parity standpoint. And a lot of times the hardware the operating systems would have features that would take advantage of like hot swappable power supplies and CPUs and memory and things like that. Whereas in the Linux space, it's like, let's instead scale out and write our applications to be failure resistant instead of like having these bulletproof systems. And I'm seeing the same story play out all over again, where these companies like, oh, what's the best model? Gemini leapfrogs OpenAI, and Anthropic comes along, and they're all leapfrogging, and then all of a sudden DeepSeek comes out from nowhere, right? And we see Meta, they're open sourcing their weights. So it's really interesting seeing all that happen. But from a model standpoint, I'm starting to see the same way that operating systems got commoditized to
Okay.
the language models getting commoditized, and tying that back into APIs and integration. What you really want to do is that for like the customers that I talk to, you don't want to say that this model is the answer. What's the problem? You want to take a look at your problem and pick the right model for that. And I call it AI model optionality, where as the models keep leapfrogging each other, you should be able to swing the API endpoint to the better model that you need. And one of the other things that we have is that there's the emergence of things like small language models that they could run on device. So for today, we may have to use a cloud provider for our language model, but the language models are improving so quickly that ultimately you'll be able to run those models on a device and you don't even have to go out to a cloud. That's going to reduce the cost. It's going to reduce the environmental impact. And it's also going to push the cost of the AI inference onto the owner of the device as opposed to the owner of the application. And so that's going to open up all kind of new business models. But the key is to hey, let's build with the best frontier models today, but let's remember that may not, what the best model is today may not be the best model in the future. So let's build in that optionality so we could change from one model to the next as the market quickly improves itself.
That's great. And I really love your blogs, Dave. And yeah, especially those Mules blogs you write. When we started this podcast, when we are researching it, and we tumbled upon one blog you wrote called Five Predictions for the 2025 for the AI and API. That was a great blog, and we should leave that link in the notes somewhere. And do you think it's written in November 24? And right now it is in May. Do you think all those predictions, five predictions you have done there, are they still valid, or are there anything you have AI and especially API and AI intersection?
Yeah, no, I love that, Ajay. When, a lot of times, like when people do like prediction articles or blog posts, they're predicting 10 years out in the future. And it's really hard to predict that far out. Like, who would have seen DeepSeek coming, right? If, and things like that, right? And then also these blog posts come out and people read them and they're like, that's great. What am I supposed to do with this as an IT leader, as an IT decision maker? How can I make this actionable? So I intentionally brought the focus into what's going to happen this year in 2025 and how to get ready for it. So not only do I make the predictions, I put in advice for IT leaders of like, okay, now that I said this, what should you be looking for? What should you do as a result of this? And what's funny is that I came up with, the predictions of what I started to see on the horizon that were a little bit fuzzy and they weren't quite coming into focus yet, but I see it out on the horizon, but I'm starting to see it come true right now.
Okay.
Like I was just saying about small language models, those are being huge. The environmental impact, everybody's talking about that now. And there's so many things in that article that are happening. So whether it is environmental impact of like, how do I pick the best model, not just for performance and price performance, but also environmental impact, right? And building in that optionality so I could change from one model provider to another and swing that API endpoint over to the model that has a better carbon footprint. So there are a lot of things in that blog post that are, it's like I'll see a news article and oh, that's prediction number 2 that I said, or and I could draw a straight line back to, it's like I remember I talked about this, and it's really gratifying to see a lot of these things come true.
Yeah, definitely. I reread again before this call, and I felt that it is still most of it extremely relevant. One thing I want to pick from that article is LAM, because I hear a lot about LLMs, but SLMs, but LAM is something I just heard from this article, and it's not well spoken outside. How do you see these LAM differentiates from others, and how does it help the integration?
Yeah, so LAMs, or large action models, they're huge this year. So if we like everybody was talking about LLMs, over the past 2 years or so, and then all of a sudden I see this articles coming out about large action models, or LAMs, and I'm like, really? It's like these people are coming up with acronyms and buzzwords. It's like I have enough buzzwords, I have enough acronyms I got to keep track of. How real is it? What is it? What do I got to? Why do I need to learn this? So a large action model is, think of it as a large language model or a language model in general that specializes in function calling. And then you're probably thinking, Ajay, it's like, oh, function calling. APIs, right? And there's a direct correlation there. And so like everybody was talking about generative AI over the past couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Over the past, say, 9 months or so, agentic AI has captured the imagination of the tech scene,
Yes.
right? We've gone from generative AI, where we generate an email, we generate an image, we generate a video, but it doesn't really do anything. It's just a piece of content that gets created.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a large action model is all about action. And so that's where, so Salesforce is doing things with large action models that are the underpinning of Agentforce, but there are plenty of other models that are out there that are using large action models. And then you're probably thinking, okay, really, what does it do? How does it work?
Mm-hmm.
So think of it like a large action model of, it's like, I want to know the weather in Palo Alto. And
Mm-hmm.
and then and so what'll happen is it'll go to the large action model. The large action model will take that prompt and say that, okay, what function calls match most closely to this prompt? And it's like, and of the catalog of actions that I could take, I could look up a stock price, I could check a news ticker, I could check a flight status, I could check the weather. And it's like, oh, it wants to know, this person wants to know the weather in Palo Alto, so I want to call the weather API instead of all the other APIs that are out there. So it'll call the weather API. So instead of the large language model just like hallucinating and pulling out something that sounds plausible but is not up to date and connecting to any weather service out there, the large action model is making a function call out to a weather API. It pulls that information back and then returns the result. So it's grounded in the real truth. So instead of just a RAG, retrieval augmented generation that has like documents and it's pulling from it and it's generating something, it's actually doing actions. And that's the underpinning of agents. And that's the other thing is that with agentic AI, it's like, I'm like, agentic AI, what's the difference? This is a new buzzword I got to learn. What's the big deal? And the difference between generative AI and agentic AI is all about action. So instead of generating that email, it's like, would you like me to send that email for you? Or it's like, oh, in order to be eligible for this government service, and it looks in the RAG and it finds out all the regulations, you need to call these people, you need to set up a ticket, you need to do all this. The agent would say, would you like me to do that for you? That would you like me to do that for you is all about function calling. And that function calling is underpinned by large action models that live under the hood of the agents.
That's very interesting. So it's more like a proactive than reactive. But in this context, right, we are hearing a lot about MCP and A2A, and I hear that MuleSoft also started one of the first providers to support this one. And does LAM is related to the MCP or A2A, or are they completely different?
They're related. So think of a large action model as that engine that is going to have the agent do things. But the way I look at visually, I look at it, and there's some good infographics out on the internet that compare and contrast MCP with A2A. MCP, Model Context Protocol, is all about connecting agents to data sources, right? So imagine it's like, instead of having the hardwired weather API and all that, I could have a service, an MCP service for weather. And so it makes it very easy to integrate with, right? So if I were to draw it out, like, for our MuleSoft fans out there with API-led connectivity, we have our process API or our large action model doing function calls to an MCP service to get the weather, right? And then agent to agent or A to A that's horizontal. So along where you have all of your agents, that's where you get your agents to talk to each other. And so a good example there is, imagine having like a travel agent, right? So I'm going to have an agent that says that, hey, I'm planning a vacation to San Francisco. And it's like, okay, so what it will do is it'll integrate with a calendar agent that's going to talk to an MCP connection that's going to talk to my Google Calendar. It's going to do A to A so the main travel agent is going to talk to a flight agent. It's going to talk to a hotel agent. It's going to talk to maybe a rental car agent if I need it, right? And then it's going to coordinate all these things. So instead of having one agent that is designed to solve everything, this is a way to divide the jobs to be done up such that the main travel agent can dispatch work and communicate with other agents. So think of A to A is a horizontal communication between agents, and MCP is a vertical one where the agents are talking to your systems of record.
Very clean way to understand it. So, a lot of the enterprises, right, have some form of ethos saying that we will follow a lot of open source for an enterprise organization across, and they are big users of Red Hat and these type of products. Some are flexible to use both the products, but with the current AI thing, right, majority of the stuff that is coming out is proprietary. Like everybody has some boxed up offerings on the LLMs and all those things. How do you see enterprises have challenge in scaling AI, if at all they are more pro on the open platforms?
Yeah, and so to me, it's like going back to my Red Hat days, we would talk about vendor lock in. And the reality is that you're going to have, no matter what you pick, you're going to have some level of vendor lock in. So whether you're locked into a proprietary vendor or you're locked into an open source vendor like Red Hat, or you're locked into some homegrown application that you wrote yourself, or you're locked into an open source project, you're making these choices. But the level and the thickness of the handcuffs of that lock-in are going to vary based upon the level of how much you are connecting with them. And the reality is too is that there are plenty of open source purists that are out there that want to do everything open source. And the reality is that community open source, you're going to reach a point where you're going to be touching something proprietary. There, as far as like an open source chip or an open source, it's like there are open source chips, but there is some proprietary nature to the architecture, right? And so you're gonna, along that substrate, you may be using community software or commercially supported open source or proprietary hardware, but it's all about your design choices that you're making. So the key is, going back to my Red Hat days, I would encourage people, don't be dogmatic about, oh, it's pure community open source is what I'm going to do, because it's actually going to, that could create technical debt for you to maintain, right? So even though the software is quote unquote free from an acquisition cost standpoint, the cost of sustainment is an unseen cost that's going to burden your team, that's going to distract you from doing any innovation on top of the open source. So the key is to be thoughtful about, okay, well, here I'm going to use this community stuff because there isn't a commercially supported open source variant of it yet. There may be a Red Hat for A2A that comes along, or that can come along and be able to take advantage of it. But it's like you got to make your choices, and to me is you got to be thinking about that exit strategy, that thickness of the handcuffs that you're wearing as you make those choices, so that when you ever get mad at that open source provider or that internally developed application or that proprietary system, how quick what are those switching costs to move from one to another? And this is where using things like APIs and a composable architecture is really, really important. So you could have your you could set everything up in exchange for your AI model that everybody is using, right? And then down the road, it's like, oh, well, we got mad at this LLM provider and we want to switch it out. Well, you could switch it out, and it's transparent to the people that are calling that service, because you're lock in the handcuffs that you're wearing are very, very thin, and you change it once and then everybody gets to benefit from it, as opposed to the point-to-point integrations of, there's no standardization where one application is using one LLM provider, another one's using another LLM provider, and things are moving very, very quickly in the AI space. As we talked about, people are leapfrogging each other. Companies are going to go out of business, right? And we got to get ready for that. And so the way to do that is start now planning your exit strategy. You may never have to use it, but having that in the bank allows you to know where, it's like it shifts that power away from a vendor into the hands of a customer in terms of lowering switching costs.
That sounds great. This is all good in embedding the new features of the AI things are happening into the integration world. In the current integrations, what we are doing to the customers, are you seeing any ways where AI can come and help to improve or fast track the integrations, which we are already doing it, or the ones like especially on the legacy modernization side, or application rationalization side, there is a lot of projects are pending from years together, and though a lot of tech debt is there. How do you see AI can come and help to accelerate these things?
Yeah, so I love that. There's a, so like about a year or so ago, when generative AI just first hit the scene, I have a coworker, a colleague that he was given this API spec, and without much or any documentation at all. And how often has that happened to all of us? Where we're dumped off a piece of code and that it's like we got to maintain it and everything. He stuck it inside of generative AI and said, "Explain this to me. What's going on here?" And it did a fantastic job, just sort of like figuring this out and explaining it in plain language of what that API does and how it's constructed. And so to me, that's going to be helpful in terms of figuring out, just from a generative AI standpoint, of like building, maintaining legacy systems and refactoring systems and rehosting them and replatforming them. But there are some other things that are going on, like we have Anypoint Code Builder, which is really cool, where we're adding features in there that, especially as we think about how everybody's using AI assistants to help them with their coding, Anypoint Code Builder allows you to use AI to generate API specs. And we also have ways that we could generate flows inside of there using AI from an augmentation standpoint. And so what's going to help there is that instead of having this really high bar of I got to be this MuleSoft expert that knows everything about MuleSoft, what it's going to do is it's going to make MuleSoft much more approachable to allow the junior developers to develop that skill. So instead of having to hire and bring in that 90th percentile expert in MuleSoft, you could start off with a new college grad that may be at the 30% level, but augment that and use AI to get them to the 75th percentile. And that's going to be really important as the challenges we have with finding and retaining talent and bringing people in and all that and making them productive right away. It's really important. There's another thing, and I'll have to give it to you to put in the show notes. We've been doing some things with Cursor as well, and we have a video of it that's pretty cool. That it's like you don't even need to use our tooling.
Mm-hmm.
We have some connectors that will connect into Cursor. And so we're meeting our developers where they are, where they're doing their vibe coding inside of something like Cursor, but they could generate MuleSoft applications inside of Cursor without having to leave that UI and swivel chair to another platform. So again, that's more of an accelerant of getting that developer that is like just new to MuleSoft and quickly increasing their level of expertise. And that's where I think AI is going to really help them. I think there are some other things too, that it's not just using AI to build the spec, but having it take a look at look at your APIs and look at your integrations, and have it be part of your security team from a red teaming standpoint, or and have it play the role of a more senior developer to say that, okay, well, I did this, I got it to work. And this is something a lot of developers, from our computer science classes, we would take our class, we would write our application for our homework, we would turn it in, and we get an A because we got it to work. But the problem is that most of the time our attackers are looking for ways to abuse the software in ways that it wasn't intended. And as developers, we don't think that way naturally. It's like we're all burdened. We all have a lot of work to do. And so it's like, I got the application to work. I'm moving on to the next project. But if I could give my code to an AI to say, don't just look at it from a correctness standpoint, but red team it. Are there opportunities for an attacker to abuse this because I have hard-coded credentials in there, or I have other things that, so again, it takes that junior developer that graduated school because they got their program to work, to having them think a little bit more strategically about not just how the application works, but how it could be used in ways that were unintended and prevent that from happening.
Yeah, that will be great, especially from a governance and governance point of view. Yeah. One other thing, Dave, is about you spent so much time in the government sector. Even now, also from MuleSoft, you support a lot on the government sector, and we hear a lot about this dodge and efficiency, and things are happening. How do you see it? How is AI is getting adopted in the public sector currently?
Yeah, and so with AI adoption in the public sector, I think there are a lot of agencies that are looking at generative AI. It's like, yeah, we think this whole AI thing may take off, right? And so they're using things like Chat GPT and the generative AI. But the problem that they're quickly realizing, and I've seen this so many times talking with government officials as well as uh, you know consultants that serve the public sector, is that the generative AI is good, but it's not grounded in their data. And so having that integration of the LLMs to be able to talk to their systems of record is so important. And that's where MuleSoft could help out in terms of doing that integration. So we have things like MuleSoft AI Chain and tools that, it's like for a lot of our customers that are just getting started with AI, the thing that and especially the ones that are MuleSoft customers, instead of, it's like, I have my MuleSoft group over here, I'm doing my AI project over here. What we really want them to do is take a look at things like MuleSoft AI Chain and our MCP connectors and the A2A connectors that we're developing. And taking the MuleSoft things that they already understand, they know, and they love, and then they're extending that to AI. Because the same way that they have connectors and they're using the connectors for like Workday, SAP, all the different connectors, hundreds of connectors that we have, we're just simply extending that to AI by using the AI connectors. And so that's going to be an accelerant for them to ground things in data. And so then that will help catch them up to the generative AI world. But still, I think there's a lot more to be done in terms of agentic AI, because as people call it the silver tsunami. That the number of government employees that are eligible to retire is huge, right? And people are retiring, and then you have this brain drain of people leaving, right? And so, as much as possible, you got to take a look at those jobs to be done and identify where automation could play a role. And those are things that MuleSoft has been doing for years with our automation tooling and RPA, but now adding Agentic AI into it and using tools like Agentforce shows a lot of promise that allows us to work with government agencies to really help them accelerate and be able to provide some elasticity. So it's really early for our government customers yet. We're working through the FedRAMP certification, so it's not there. But we have a lot of good customer examples of Agentforce that are government adjacent examples. So like a good example is Wiley. So like the bookseller, they're a big Agentforce customer. And the thing with Wiley is that they have seasonality, right? So back to school time. So come this fall, all the kids are going back to school. Their support line is going to spike because of everybody saying, hey, I got the wrong book, right? Things change and everything. And so they can't hire their way out of that from a support standpoint. So what they're doing is that Wiley is using Agentforce to help do the first line triage and the customer support for a lot of these things, to automate that and take that seasonal lumpiness out. And then and as I think about that, I know that's applicable to our education space for where we cover in the public sector. Again, back to school registrants, signing up for classes. There you have these seasonal bursts where, from a customer support standpoint, you can't hire your way out of it. Also for seasonality with things like tax time. So like in the US, April 15th, there's a big tax surge. Everybody's asking questions, and then it's quiet for a while. Or hurricane season with FEMA and disaster relief, right? It's very seasonal whenever it happens. And then also, from a FEMA example, another use case would be, it's not just seasonality, but unexpected burstiness, right? Where there's a tornado, there's a disaster, and you got to provide relief. And you can't hire people and have them sit on the bench and wait for the phone to ring in case there's a disaster. That's not a good use of government resources. But if you could use digital labor to supplement the people on the ground that can, they are the ones that could do a lot of the hands-on hands-on work, they are now freed up thanks to agents to handle some of that seasonality that's provided, where they could do those actions.
These are great examples. Thank you so much, Dave. Let's have some fun, and I will ask you some rapid fire questions. You can give me one word answers, what comes to your mind. It's fast just to get to understand what's going on in your mind. What is your favorite open source project right now?
My favorite open source project. Like I've always been a Linux fan, for decades, like going back to when I was working for the government contractor. So it's like, for me, it's just fascinating to see. And so I'll leave it at that, but I could go on and on, but to me, it's just fascinating.
One book every tech leader should read.
I got a blog post for that. So how big things get done. So that is, and so it's like I read it, and everybody that's doing integration and API management, you're going to read it and you're going to think that MuleSoft sponsored that book, but we didn't. But it's written, so it's how big things get done. And it's basically written by somebody that studied over decades how massive projects succeed and how they fail and what are those success patterns. And it talks about using modularity and a Lego approach and everything. And I'm like it's totally right for us. And I wrote a blog post, and I wrote a blog post of the lessons I learned from that book, and we could put a link in the show notes for that where people could check it out.
Will be great. What is the most underrated leadership trait today?
Listening. Yeah. So, and that's where, I think a lot of times people are, they it's like, somebody comes to a leader and it's like, what, I have this problem. And then they quickly want to solve that problem. Mm-hmm. And, they have a response right away, as opposed to like digging into the problem and listening and asking probing questions to tease out how, the underlying, there's the Toyota ask 5 whys, ask why 5 times to get to the ground truth. And instead of just like shooting from the hip, coming up with an answer and moving on to the next thing, taking a moment to listen to a colleague and hear about what their challenges are and getting to that ground truth.
Who would be your dream keynote speaker if you love to see on a stage?
Jesus Christ, hands down. And so it's like, that's people, and it's related to a, one of the common questions of somebody from history. It's like, who better to be able Absolutely. To meet and to hear straight from him, what's going on. I would watch his TED Talks all day long.
Definitely. Hands down. What is your favorite sports team?
Pittsburgh Steelers, hands down. So huge fan growing up in Western Pennsylvania.
That's great. So before we wrap up, Dave, if you have any piece of advice to young professionals or integration practitioners stepping into the tech or integration open source, what would be some suggestions you have for them?
Well, always be learning, right? And, work with MuleSoft, work with our great partners like you guys. It's the thing here, and this goes back to the How Big Things Get Done book. They talk, one of the keys to success is bringing in the experts, right? So, and they talked a lot about, people that would go in with these mega projects and they've never done it before, and then they would just fail because they're making all these mistakes for the very first time, and it's a learning experience for them. But if they could bring in awesome partners like you guys, like us, that have been there, done that, we know the fast path to get through the maze to get to success a lot faster and a much more sustainable sort of way. And that's particularly true when it comes to MuleSoft in terms of like getting away from the point-to-point integrations, the quick and dirty, let's solve this and we'll worry about that later. And you end up building all this technical debt. Working with the pros to build that API-led connectivity lifestyle, you're sort of laying this foundation of this IT superstructure that you're building that's going to sustain and live the test of time. So I think that the biggest piece of advice is working with great partners like Prowess Software and with MuleSoft, and going back to the book of How Big Things Get Done. That was one of their lessons learned of standing on the shoulders of giants, right? You could see further when you do that, and the reason for that is that there are a lot of times that customers will start off on their journey and they may fail because they're making these mistakes for the very first time. Whereas working with partners that they know, they've been there, they've done that, they've made mistakes, you're benefiting from their lessons learned. And so working with our awesome partners like you guys is such a key thing to be able to do, because that is going to allow them to be successful a lot sooner. And This is particularly true when it comes to MuleSoft, because the key is you want to get away from, going from project to project and quick and dirty point-to-point integrations. What you want to do is lay a foundation for API-led connectivity. And once that foundation is built, that's where you could build that IT super mega structure that is not going to fall over, because you've built it on this solid foundation that has been proven by our team and your team, and as we work together on these massive projects.
Thank you so much, David. Thanks for your time. I'm sure everybody got a very good insights from this conversation. Yeah, you can take it over.
Thanks, David, and thank you, Ajay, for another insightful episode. If you're inspired by today's conversation, be sure to subscribe to AI Meets API wherever you get your podcasts. For more insights on responsible innovation and platform strategies, follow us on LinkedIn. Until next time, stay curious and stay connected.